money is created in a MMT would start with the principle that money is created in the modern age is essentially a creation of government. It's a creation of the state, if you know what I mean, and it does so through the central bank. And the central bank is the government has a very big checking account in the central bank, and it gives a license to the central bank to create debt in the central bank. Create a credit note to credit that, basically to allow the central bank to allow other banks to have an account in the central bank, if you know what I mean. And the central bank literally just puts numbers on a computer saying, if you want to issue €1 billion, you just write minus 1 billion on an account in the central bank, and that 1 billion is credited then to to the other banks, if you know what I mean. They have accounts with the central bank, essentially. Okay, is actually probably how it works, really. But it's no more nor less than creating figures on a computer these days, because it's not connected to gold. It was until 1970. Some people might say, oh, well, sure, look, there must be a gold held or whatever, but that's not true. You could have a currency attached to gold, as in you have to have as much gold as what you're saying there is money, if you know what I mean. And that used to be this old way of doing it. But since 1970, it's now what they call completely fiat currency. So fiat, I think the very first words of the Bible, actually, to go around in a circle, fiat lux. No, it's not the first words, but there is the words in the Bible that say in Latin, fiat lux. It means let there be light. So fiat in Latin is let there be, and it means that it's created out of nothing, essentially.
That's
so
amazing.
You literally just write. It's like, right, you could write it down on a piece of paper.
Okay, if you were to go anywhere pretty much in the world, well, almost anywhere, and tell people that money isn't real, there's a good chance you might end up with a black eye if not laughed at.
Well, it's real. It's real in the sense that it has real consequences and it's a real thing. We created it as a technology, so it's a fantastic technology, if you know what I mean. It allows us to do stuff that we couldn't otherwise do, I think when we look at the history of it, we can understand why it's so clever, and it's a brilliant invention. But I think it's important to understand where it comes from and how it's created, because otherwise we're in this problem of what we just said. We think we pay taxes. If we look at it that way around, then we understand that money comes from the government. Therefore, when you pay a tax, what are you doing? You have to get money from the government in the first place to be able to pay the tax. So actually what you're doing is giving your money, when you pay tax, you're giving your money back to the government that created it in the first place. And so if you look at it, what does the government really do when it takes taxes in? Is it actually is cancelling the debt that it created in the central bank? Okay.
All right. So hypothetically, say the Irish government borrowed €1 million. That's a massive sum. Just say hypothetically, they borrowed 1 million, and then they squandered most of that. Now they have to pay back the bank 1.1 million, say, interest. So they go into the room and say, look, let's jack up the tax for that. Let's create a tax for that. Let's create another tax on top of that. Does it work like that?
No, yeah. Well, no, hang on. So you're getting into a central point in MMT, which is that what it means is that if it's your own currency and you're already issuing the currency, right? You can't ever run out of money, and you can't not ever pay it back. You can always pay back the debt. It doesn't cost you anything, if you think about it, because you're the one issuing the money. So you can't ever run out of money, and you can't ever not be able to pay your debts as long as they're in the currency you're issuing. It's different if it's someone else's currency, okay? So we can get into that.
What you call it? America has that system, haven't they?
Yeah. Well, we all run a system like that. So we're running a system like that, except we're using euro. So it makes it a little more complicated, because we're dealing with the European Central Bank as our main bank that's creating the money. Okay. But so let me just put it simply, like, so you said we borrowed 1 million. So what do you, when you say borrow, what do you mean borrow? You mean borrow from where? Like, where would we borrow 1 million from?
Yeah. So the state borrows from the central bank, isn't it?
Okay, so the state doesn't even, okay, so you could say that it borrows, but it doesn't even borrow. In a sense, it kind of, you could say, you can say the word borrow, okay, but it's not really a borrow. What happens is the central bank just creates the money in the account by creating a debit account. It's like they call it double entry bookkeeping or whatever. So there's a debit, whatever is put on the government. Say the government has a giant account to pay for nurses and hospitals, for example, right? And IT security, okay. So it needs to spend 20 million to pay gangsters or whatever, right? It has an account in the Bank of Ireland or whatever, say. All it does is the central bank credits 20 million into that account in the Bank of Ireland, and minus 20 million is written into the central bank's ledger. And you see that minus 20 million that's written in there. That's the beginning of what we call the national debt. Okay, so as that mounts up, that's the national debt. But what the national debt really is, if you think about it, is it's whatever. If it says minus 20 million in the central bank, that means there's 20 million out there in the economy. It's put 20 million out, so it's a national debt, but we don't owe it to anybody, because if all the tax was to come back in, if every penny we put out came back in to the central bank, the account would be back to zero. You see?